The Syrian civil war is a conflict that has taken very many lives, over 470,000. It has displaced more than 6 million people, and over 4 million Syrians are currently seeking refuge in other countries.
It's incredibly complex if you think about the various actors involved, right? So you got the Assad regime, clearly dictatorial and have done terrible things to their own citizens and continue to this day. You got various rebel groups, but among those rebel groups you have a spectrum. You've got secular rebel groups who want to overthrow the government of Assad and establish a more secular state in Syria, but then you've got obviously ISIS on the other end of that. And ISIS is fighting Assad.
The ultimate goal of ISIS is to establish a global caliphate. In other words, they want to establish a global Islamic state.
ISIS, in at least the case of Syria, ISIS exploited the chaos that the Arab Spring helped to create in Syria. The civil war between the Assad forces and the various rebel groups. But ISIS already existed and really grew out of Iraq specifically at first. But I really think the start of ISIS comes out of the aftermath of the Iraq War, the second Iraq War, which of course started in 2003. But ISIS developed in Iraq, in the vacuum of power in Iraq, with a Shia dominant government, right, which was put in power after Saddam Hussein was toppled by the US-led coalition. And that Shia government was essentially unable to, in many ways, help Iraq rebuild after the war. And so the Sunni minority in Iraq was feeling excluded from political power, from services, from opportunities, and did not feel secure either with the military being predominantly Shia in Iraq. ISIS grew out of that in what are called the Sunni heartlands of Iraq, and then quickly spread to neighboring Syria, and even up a little bit into Turkey and other parts of the Middle East. But
the destruction of the Syrian civil war has ravaged many cities and destroyed many buildings. An estimated 3 million buildings have been affected, many completely destroyed, including schools, churches, mosques, and hospitals. Almost 50% of major Syrian cities have been destroyed.
The Syrian refugee crisis is an enormous issue, and that includes the European Union and beyond. As many migrants are trying to Syrians are trying to escape the war, they're ending up in refugee camps.
According to Amnesty International, more than 4 million refugees from Syria are in just 5 countries: Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. So far, the financial impacts of the war have been $275 billion for Syria, $4 billion per year for the United States, and $500 billion for Russia. The costs of supporting these refugees is staggering. According to a study done through Georgetown University, Jordan is paying $168 million per year to help refugees with basic health care, $257 million to educate refugee kids, and $62 million to provide running water, power, and municipal services.
They are not able to deal with the number of refugees that have been pouring across their borders. So that's been a huge impact on neighboring countries. And obviously the violence of the war in Syria has spilled over because you've got multiple actors, everything from ISIS to Al-Qaeda, kind of what's left of them, to various rebel groups, to the Assad regime. So the war has spilled over into neighboring nations as well. And then you've got Western powers, the United States, Russia, involved in that conflict. So that's dangerous for the whole region. This conflict has hugely impacted the region and beyond.
Considering these impacts and the potential to spread beyond the Middle East, what can we do to help? Is there a role for the U.S. to play in helping to resolve this conflict?
So then who do we support and how do you deter? So if we're going to support the forces that are trying to overthrow Assad, which I think we probably should be, to help establish a more open and democratic Syria. But the problem is then if we're supporting those groups, how do we know that those groups aren't more extremist, right? And how do we make sure that any assistance that we do give helps, from our point of view, put in power more secular groups that would be able to combat ISIS? Because if the Assad government were to fall, ISIS might be the most powerful alternative, and that's a pretty frightening scenario, isn't it? Personally, I believe that we should be involved trying to bolster and support the more secular rebel groups, to try and force the Assad government to either come to a political solution or perhaps even remove them from power. But